The snow was already turning red at the edges when Elena heard the cry. She dropped the bundle of firewood in her arms and spun toward the sound, her heart slamming against her ribs. It came again, thin and desperate, cutting through the howling wind like a blade. Somewhere near the frozen creek, something small was dying, and every instinct in her body told her to run toward it instead of away. Elena had lived at the edge of Blackthorn Forest her whole life. She knew the difference between the wind moaning through dead branches and the sound of something alive begging not to be forgotten. This was the second kind. She left the firewood scattered across the snow and ran, her boots crunching through the frost, her breath coming out in short white clouds. The cries grew louder as she reached the creek bank. There, half buried in snow beneath the twisted roots of an old oak, she found them. 3 small shapes, barely bigger than her 2 fists together, huddled against each other for warmth that was quickly running out. Wolf pups. Their fur was matted with ice, their tiny ribs visible with every shaking breath. Elena knelt down slowly, unsure if their mother might be nearby and dangerous. She listened. No growl answered her from the trees, no shadow moved between the trunks. Only silence, and the pitiful sound of 3 pups who had clearly been alone for longer than any pup should be. She should have turned back. Every practical thought in her mind told her that wild things belonged in the wild, that a woodcutter's daughter with barely enough food for herself had no business feeding 3 wolf pups through a winter that had already killed 2 of her neighbor's sheep. But when she looked into the eyes of the smallest pup, something stopped her breath entirely. The eyes were not the eyes of an animal. They were far too aware, far too knowing, watching her with an intelligence that made the hair on her arms rise despite the cold. It was as if the pup understood exactly what she was deciding, and was quietly, desperately, hoping she would choose to help. "You poor things," she whispered, reaching out a careful hand. The moment her fingers touched the closest pup's fur, all 3 of them pressed toward her at once, as if her warmth alone could save them. She gathered them into her cloak, feeling their small bodies trembling against her chest, and made the only decision that felt possible in that moment. She would not leave them to die. The walk back to her cottage felt longer than it ever had before. The wind seemed to grow angrier with every step, pushing against her as though trying to convince her to turn around. Twice she thought she heard something large moving through the trees behind her, keeping pace, watching. She told herself it was only her imagination, fed by fear and cold, but she quickened her steps all the same. Her cottage sat at the very edge of the village, close enough to the forest that most of her neighbors considered her strange for choosing to live there. Her father had built the small home years ago, before sickness took him and left Elena alone, with nothing but his tools, a small garden, and more courage than sense. She pushed open the door with her shoulder and hurried inside, kicking it shut behind her against the cold. The 3 pups blinked in the sudden warmth of her small fire. Up close, in better light, Elena could see them more clearly. One had fur so dark it looked almost black in the firelight, with a small white patch near his left ear. Another was a lighter gray, lean and long-legged even as a pup, with eyes that seemed to study every corner of the room. The third, the smallest, had fur the color of dried wheat, and he pressed himself closest to Elena's side the moment she set them down. "You must be starving," she said softly, moving toward the small pot hanging over her fire. She had little to offer. A heel of bread, some milk she had been saving, a strip of dried meat meant for her own supper, but watching the pups shiver and whimper, she could not imagine eating while they went without. She warmed the milk carefully, softened the bread within it, and set the small bowl on the floor. The pups fell upon it with a hunger that broke her heart. She watched them eat, marveling at how quickly the meal disappeared, and felt something shift inside her chest. These were not simply lost animals. There was something else here, something she could not yet name, but which she felt as clearly as the warmth of her own fire. Days passed, and the pups grew stronger under her care. Elena kept them hidden in the small root cellar beneath her cottage during the day, worried what her neighbors might say if they discovered wild wolves living so close to the village. She fed them whatever she could spare, sometimes going without her own meal so they would not go hungry, and slowly, the pups began to trust her completely. She noticed strange things almost immediately. The pups did not fight over food the way animals often did. Instead, they seemed to take turns, the darkest one always allowing the smallest to eat first, the gray one watching the door as though standing guard, even as a tiny creature barely able to walk steadily. When she spoke to them, They tilted their heads in a way that felt less like confusion and more like genuine listening. She began to give them names, though she told herself it was foolish to name creatures she might one day have to release back into the forest. The dark one she called Bram, for his quiet strength. The gray one became Kale, for his watchful eyes. The smallest, the one who stayed closest to her heart, she named Finn. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with rumors that Elena paid little attention to at first. Travelers spoke of trouble within the great wolf packs that ruled the deeper forests beyond Blackthorn, whispered stories of a powerful alpha king whose sons had vanished without a trace. Villagers exchanged these tales over market stalls and tavern tables, more entertained by the mystery than concerned by it, since the affairs of wolves rarely touched the lives of ordinary people. Elena listened to none of it closely enough. She was too consumed with her small, secret family, too focused on keeping 3 growing pups fed and warm through the harshest part of winter. She did not yet understand that the very creatures curled against her fire each night were the missing pieces of the mystery the entire village found so entertaining. One evening, as she prepared a thin stew from the last of her vegetables, she noticed Finn standing unusually still by the cellar door, ears pointed toward the darkness outside. Bram rose beside him a moment later, hackles raised slightly, a low sound rumbling in his small chest that seemed far too serious for a creature his size. Kale pressed close to Elena's leg, as though positioning himself between her and whatever lay beyond the door. "What is it?" she whispered, setting down her spoon. She moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. Snow fell steadily, illuminated by the pale light of a rising moon, and for a long moment, she saw nothing unusual at all. Then, at the very edge of the tree line, she caught the faint outline of a large shape, tall and still, watching her cottage from a distance that made her blood run cold. She stepped back from the window immediately, pulling the curtain closed with trembling hands. The shape had not moved, had not made a sound, but something about its stillness felt far more dangerous than if it had charged toward her outright. Whatever it was patient. It was watching, and Elena had the sudden, terrifying certainty that it was searching for exactly what she was hiding beneath her floor. She spent that night awake, sitting beside the cellar door with the pups curled tightly against her, listening to every creak of wind and branch outside her walls. By morning, the shape in the trees was gone, and she almost convinced herself she had imagined the whole thing out of exhaustion and fear. Almost. But the pups remembered. In the days that followed, they grew more cautious, more watchful, refusing to stray far from Elena even when she opened the cellar door to let them stretch their legs in the small fenced yard behind her cottage. Bram took to standing at the fence line each evening, staring into the trees with an intensity that unsettled her. Kale began pacing at odd hours, restless and alert. Only Finn remained affectionate as ever, though even he pressed closer to her at night, as if sensing danger neither of them could fully explain. Elena told herself she was simply being careful, that any sensible person would be cautious after raising 3 wolf pups in secret through the coldest months of the year. She did not yet know how right the pups were to be afraid, or how close the danger circling her small cottage truly was. She only knew that something out there in the dark forest wanted what she had chosen to protect, and that she would not give it up easily. As winter began its slow retreat and the first signs of a thaw crept into the world, Elena found herself more attached to the 3 pups than she ever thought possible. They had become her family in every way that mattered, filling the silence her father's death had left behind, with warmth, mischief, and a strange, unshakable sense of purpose. She watched them grow larger, stronger, more coordinated, marveling at how quickly they seemed to mature, compared to the descriptions of ordinary wolves she had heard from hunters passing through the village. She did not yet understand what that meant. She only knew that whatever these 3 creatures were, she loved them fiercely, and she would protect them with everything she had, even as the shadow in the trees continued to watch and wait and search for the missing princes that fate had placed directly into her care. The nights grew longer with worry rather than darkness now, each evening bringing new sounds from the forest that made Elena's heart race. She began sleeping with a small knife beneath her pillow, though she doubted it would do much good against whatever watched from beyond the tree line. She strengthened the fence around her small yard, patched every gap in her cottage walls, and taught herself to recognize the difference between an ordinary forest sound and something far more deliberate. Bram grew increasingly protective as the days passed, positioning himself near the door whenever Elena left to fetch water or firewood, his young body already showing hints of the powerful animal he would eventually become. Cale's intelligence continued to astonish her, his ability to understand simple commands, and even anticipate her needs feeling less like instinct and more like genuine comprehension. And Finn, sweet and gentle Finn, remained her shadow, following her from room to room whenever the cellar door was left open, as though terrified of losing the only safety he had ever known. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the edge of her property, Elena spotted fresh tracks pressed into the softening mud. Large tracks, far larger than any wolf she had ever seen described, leading directly toward her cottage, before circling back into the deeper forest. Her hands shook as she knelt to examine them, and she felt, for the first time, the true weight of what she might be facing. She hurried home immediately, gathering the pups close, and barring every door and window she could manage. That night, she sat awake once more, listening to the wind, and made a silent promise to the three sleeping shapes curled against her side. Whatever was searching for them, whatever power or danger it represented, she would not let it take them without a fight. Outside, in the shadow of the ancient trees, something powerful and grieving continued its careful search, drawing closer with each passing night to the small cottage where three missing princes slept unaware, in the arms of the woman who had saved their lives. Grace Whitmore arrived at Elena's door on a morning heavy with fog, her basket of eggs balanced on one hip and questions balanced on her tongue. She was the closest thing Elena had to a friend in the village, a baker's daughter with sharp eyes and a habit of noticing things others missed. "You look tired," Grace said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, as she always did, and thinner. "Are you eating enough, Elena?" "I'm eating enough," Elena answered, quickly moving between Grace and the cellar door, though the pups were silent and hidden below. "I've just been sleeping poorly. The wind keeps me up." Grace studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that made Elena's stomach twist with worry. "The wind," Grace repeated slowly. "Or is it the wolves everyone's been talking about? Old Henry says he saw something enormous near the eastern fields 2 nights ago. Big as a horse, he claims, though you know how his stories grow with every telling." Elena forced a small laugh, hoping it sounded natural. "You know how the village loves a good story." "Maybe," Grace said, setting her basket on the table. "Though it isn't only Henry. Half the market was talking about riders passing through 3 days back, asking after lost creatures. Wolves, apparently, though nobody could say why grown men on fine horses would care so much about missing animals." Elena's heart stumbled in her chest, but she kept her expression calm through sheer effort of will. "Strange," she managed. "Perhaps hunters looking for pelts." "Perhaps," Grace said, though her tone made it clear she did not fully believe it. She glanced toward the cellar door once, briefly, before shaking her head and changing the subject to lighter things. The upcoming spring market, a neighbor's new baby, the price of flour rising again. Elena answered where she could, grateful for the shift, though her mind remained fixed on the riders Grace had mentioned. After Grace left, Elena hurried down to the cellar, finding the 3 pups awake and restless, as though they too had sensed the tension above them. She sat with them a long while, stroking Bram's dark fur, scratching behind Cale's watchful ears, letting Finn burrow against her side. "Someone is looking for you," she whispered, more to herself than to them. "I don't know why, and I don't know what they'll do if they find you, but I promise, I won't let them take you easily." That evening, as she prepared their meal, she heard the sound of hooves on the road outside her cottage, slow and deliberate, unlike the hurried pace of villagers heading home before dark. She froze, spoon in hand, listening as the hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped directly outside her gate. She moved to the window with careful, silent steps, peering through a narrow gap in the curtain. 2 riders sat astride tall horses, wearing dark cloaks embroidered with a symbol she did not recognize, a silver wolf's head circled by twisting branches. One of them dismounted and approached her gate, his movements confident, almost predatory, in a way that made her skin crawl. Elena rushed to the cellar, ushering the pups deeper into the shadows behind stacked crates, and covering them with an old blanket. "Stay quiet," she whispered urgently. "Please, stay quiet, no matter what you hear." She closed the cellar door, just as a firm knock sounded against her front entrance, Taking a steadying breath, she smoothed her skirt, arranged her features into calm curiosity, and opened the door. The man standing before her was tall, his features sharp and unreadable beneath the hood of his cloak. His eyes swept over her briefly, then passed her into the dim interior of the cottage, searching for something he did not name. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Forgive the intrusion. We're searching for creatures that may have wandered this way. Wolf pups, 3 of them, quite young. Have you seen anything unusual in the area?" Elena kept her voice steady, though her heart pounded so loudly she feared he might hear it. "Wolf pups? No, nothing like that, though I did hear a commotion near the creek some weeks back. Perhaps they came from there." The man's gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than felt comfortable, as though searching for any sign of deception. Elena held perfectly still, refusing to look away, refusing to give him any reason to doubt her. "If you see anything," he said finally, "send word to the village inn. There is a reward for information leading to their recovery." "Of course," Elena said, forcing a small, polite smile. The man turned and mounted his horse, exchanging a quiet word with his companion, before both riders continued down the road, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Elena remained in her doorway until she could no longer hear the hoofbeats, then closed the door and sagged against it, her legs suddenly weak with relief. She hurried back to the cellar, releasing the pups from their hiding place, gathering all 3 into her arms despite their growing size. "It's all right," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "They're gone. For now at least, they're gone." Bram pressed his head against her chest, a low, comforting sound rumbling from somewhere deep inside him. Cale watched the cellar door with narrowed eyes, clearly unconvinced the danger had truly passed. Finn simply curled into her lap, as he always did, seeking comfort in the only safety he had ever known. That night, Elena barely slept, replaying the encounter over and over in her mind. The man's questions had been too specific, his description of the pups too accurate, for this to be a simple case of missing animals. Something far larger was at work here, something connected to the strange intelligence she had noticed in the pups since the very first night she found them. She began to watch them more closely after that, paying attention to details she had previously dismissed as simple curiosities. The way they seemed to communicate silently among themselves, exchanging glances that carried clear meaning. The way Bram positioned himself protectively whenever strangers approached, despite being barely more than a pup. The way Cale's eyes tracked every movement in a room, with an awareness far beyond ordinary animal instinct. And then there was the matter of their growth. In the weeks since she found them, all 3 pups had grown at a pace that defied everything she knew about wolves. They were already nearly the size of full-grown dogs, their bodies lean and powerful, their movements graceful, in a way that seemed almost unnatural for creatures so young. Elena began to suspect, though she hardly dared put the thought into words, that these were no ordinary wolves at all. Spring arrived slowly, melting the last of the winter snow into muddy rivers that ran through the forest paths. Elena continued her careful routine, feeding the pups, hiding them from curious eyes, watching always for signs of danger. The riders did not return immediately, though rumors of their search continued to circulate through the village, growing stranger with each retelling. Some claimed the riders served a powerful lord from the northern territories. Others whispered of magic, of creatures that were not entirely animal, of a kingdom hidden deep within Blackthorn Forest that few had ever seen, and fewer still had lived to describe. Elena listened to every rumor she could gather, piecing together fragments of truth from the exaggerations and fears of frightened villagers. She began to understand, slowly and with growing dread, that she had stumbled into something far larger than herself. The 3 pups sleeping in her cellar were not simply lost animals in need of rescue. They were, somehow, connected to a power that reached far beyond the borders of her small village, a power currently searching every corner of the forest for exactly what she had chosen to protect. Despite the danger, despite every rational reason to abandon her secret and turn the pups over to the searching riders, Elena found she could not bring herself to consider it, even for a moment. Whatever they were, whoever they belonged to, they had become hers in every way that mattered. She had nursed them through starvation, comforted them through fear, and grown to love them with a fierceness she had never expected to feel for anything in her quiet, solitary life. She would protect them, no matter what came next, no matter how powerful the forces searching for them might be. Elena had made her choice on that first frozen night beside the creek, and she intended to honor it, whatever the cost. The scream tore through the night and jolted Elena upright before she even understood she was awake. She scrambled from her bed, heart hammering, and rushed toward the cellar where the sound had come from, certain something terrible had happened to one of the pups. What she found instead stopped her cold in the doorway. Where Cale had been sleeping only moments before, a boy now knelt on the cellar floor, trembling, his bare skin pale in the dim moonlight filtering through the small window. He looked perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with the same gray eyes Cale always had, wide with terror and confusion, his small hands pressed against the stone floor, as though trying to hold himself together. Elena's breath caught in her throat. For a long, frozen moment, she could not move, could not speak, could only stare at the impossible sight before her. Then the boy's eyes met hers, and she saw the unmistakable recognition in them, the same intelligent, knowing gaze she had grown so familiar with over the past months. "Cale," she whispered. The boy flinched at his name, curling in on himself, clearly frightened and disoriented by whatever had just happened to his body. Elena rushed forward without further hesitation, wrapping her cloak around his shivering form and pulling him gently into her arms. "It's all right," she murmured, though her own voice shook with shock. "I have you. Whatever just happened, I have you." Bram and Finn had woken as well, both still in their wolf forms, watching the scene with wide, alert eyes. Bram moved closer, nudging Cale's arm gently with his nose, as though checking to see if his brother was truly all right. Finn pressed himself against Elena's side, whimpering softly, clearly frightened by whatever had just occurred. It took a long while for Cale to stop trembling enough to speak, and when he finally did, his voice was small and hoarse, the voice of a child who had never truly used words before. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "It just happened. I couldn't stop it." "What happened?" Elena asked gently, smoothing his damp hair back from his forehead. "Can you tell me?" Cale shook his head slowly, his gray eyes filling with tears. "I don't understand it myself. I just felt something inside me shift, and then I was like this." Elena held him close, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just witnessed. She had suspected, in the quiet corners of her thoughts, that the pups were more than ordinary wolves. She had noticed their unnatural intelligence, their rapid growth, the strange awareness in their eyes since the very first night, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of watching one of them transform into a human child before her very eyes. "You're not a wolf at all, are you?" she said softly, more statement than question. "None of you are." Cale shook his head again, his small shoulders trembling. "I don't know what we are. I only know that we've always been able to feel the change coming, even before tonight, but we never let it happen. We were too scared." "Scared of what?" "Of being found," Cale whispered. "Someone was chasing us, before you found us by the creek. We ran and ran until we couldn't run anymore, and then we couldn't remember how to change back into anything but wolves, until tonight." Elena felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Someone had been chasing 3 wolf pups capable of transforming into human children, chasing them with enough determination to send riders through her own village weeks later, still searching. The pieces were beginning to form a picture far more dangerous than she had imagined. "Who was chasing you?" she asked carefully. "Do you remember?" Cale's small face twisted with the effort of remembering, and after a long moment, he shook his head sadly. "I don't remember much before the creek. Just running, and being afraid, and then the cold, and then you." Elena held him tighter, understanding that whatever trauma had brought these 3 children to her creek that frozen night had been severe enough to blur even a child's memory of it. She resolved not to press him further, not that night, when he was already so shaken and afraid. As the night wore on, Cale grew tired, his human body apparently exhausted from whatever effort the transformation had required. Elena tucked him into her own bed, wrapping him in every blanket she owned, and sat beside him until his breathing evened into sleep. Bram and Finn curled against the bed as well, refusing to leave their brother's side even for a moment. Elena did not sleep at all that night. She sat in the darkness, turning over everything she had learned, trying to understand what she was truly caring for, and what danger it meant for all of them. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones, but her resolve remained unshaken. Whatever these three children truly were, wolves or something else entirely, she loved them, and she would protect them with everything she had. Cale did not transform back into a wolf the following morning. He remained a small boy, quiet and watchful, clinging close to Elena as she moved through her daily chores. She found spare clothes for him among items her father had kept from her own childhood, and though they hung loosely on his thin frame, he seemed grateful, simply to be covered and warm. Bram and Finn remained in their wolf forms throughout the day, though Elena noticed them watching Cale with an intensity that suggested they understood exactly what had happened, and perhaps feared or anticipated the same change happening to themselves. That fear proved well-founded only 2 nights later, when Bram too experienced the shift. Elena woke to the sound of low groaning from the cellar, and rushed down to find a boy slightly older than Cale, his dark hair damp with sweat, his black eyes wide with the same disoriented terror Cale had shown. "It's all right," Elena said immediately, kneeling beside him just as she had for his brother. "I promise you, it's all right." Bram, even in his human form, carried himself with the same protective instinct he had always shown as a wolf. Despite his own fear and confusion, his first concern was for his brothers, checking that Cale and Finn remained safe, before allowing himself to fully process what had happened to his own body. "We're not safe here anymore," he said quietly, once he had calmed enough to speak clearly. His voice, though young, carried an authority that startled Elena. "If we keep changing, someone will notice, someone will find us. No one will find you," Elena said firmly, though she could not fully promise such a thing given the riders who had already come searching. "I won't let them." Bram studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing her with a maturity far beyond his apparent years. "You don't even know what we are," he said. "How can you promise to protect something you don't understand?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't need to understand everything about you to know that you're mine to protect. I found you starving and alone, and I chose to save you. That choice doesn't change just because I've learned you're more than simple wolves." Something in Bram's expression softened at her words, the wariness in his young face easing slightly. He nodded once, a small gesture of acceptance, and allowed Elena to guide him back toward the warmth of the fire. Only Finn remained in his wolf form as the days passed, and Elena began to worry that his continued animal state meant something was different, perhaps wrong, with the smallest pup. She asked Bram and Cale about it one evening, watching as they exchanged a quiet, knowing look between them. "Finn is the youngest," Cale explained carefully. "The change takes more out of him. He'll shift when he's ready, but it might take longer." Elena accepted this explanation, though she noticed both boys watching their brother with a protective concern that suggested there was more to the story than they were willing to share. She did not press them, understanding that trust, especially for children who had clearly suffered some terrible trauma before finding her, could not be rushed. As spring deepened around them, Elena's small cottage became a delicate balance of secrets and love. Bram and Cale, now able to move between their wolf and human forms with increasing control, helped her with small chores when she deemed it safe, chopping kindling, carrying water, tending the small garden she had begun to plant. Finn remained her constant wolf companion, following her everywhere, sleeping curled against her at night, offering the simple, uncomplicated affection that both comforted and worried her. She taught the boys what she could, letters and numbers using scraps of paper and charcoal, simple songs to pass quiet evenings, stories from her own childhood that made both boys laugh in a way that filled her heart with unexpected joy. Despite the danger surrounding them, despite the riders who occasionally passed through the village, asking their careful questions, Elena found herself happier than she had been since her father's death, surrounded by a family she had never expected, but could no longer imagine living without. But happiness, she was beginning to learn, rarely came without a price. Late one evening, as she prepared the boys for sleep, Bram caught her hand suddenly, his dark eyes serious, in a way that made her stomach tighten with worry. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Something important, before it's too late to tell you." "What is it?" Elena asked, settling beside him with careful attention. Bram glanced at Cale, who nodded encouragingly, before turning back to Elena, with an expression far too solemn for a child his age. "Our father is looking for us," he said. "Not the men on horses. Someone far more powerful than them. And when he finds us, he won't just take us away quietly." "Who is your father?" Elena asked. though some deep instinct already feared the answer. Bram hesitated only a moment before speaking the words that would change everything. He is the Alpha King of the Northern Pax, and when he finds out you've been hiding us, I don't know what he'll do to you. Elena felt the color drain from her face as the full weight of Bram's words settled over her. She had suspected the pups were connected to something larger, something dangerous, but she had never imagined the scale of what she had truly stumbled into. She was not simply hiding lost wolf pups from curious searchers. She was hiding the missing heirs of a powerful kingdom from a father desperate enough to send riders through every village in the region. "How long have you known this?" she asked quietly. "We've always known," Cale admitted softly. "We just didn't know how to tell you without frightening you away." Elena looked between the two boys, then toward Finn, still curled peacefully in his wolf form near the fire, unaware of the conversation unfolding around him. Fear coiled tightly in her chest, but beneath it, something stronger remained steady and unshaken. "It doesn't matter who your father is," she said finally, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "It doesn't change what I decided that night by the creek. You are mine to protect, and I will face whatever comes, whoever comes, to keep that promise." Bram studied her carefully, searching her face for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Finding none, something in his young expression finally relaxed, though the worry in his eyes remained. "He won't stop searching," Bram said quietly, "not until he finds us. And when he does, Elena, I don't know what will happen to you." Elena reached out and pulled both boys into a tight embrace, holding them close, as though she could shield them from the future through sheer force of will alone. "Then we'll face it together," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Outside, beyond the thin walls of the small cottage, the forest remained silent and still, giving no hint of the storm that was already gathering in the distance, drawing ever closer to the family Elena had built from nothing but love and quiet, unshakable courage. Smoke rose in the distance, thin and gray against the pale morning sky, and Elena's stomach dropped the moment she saw it from her garden. It came from the direction of the northern farms, close enough to worry her, far enough that she could not immediately tell what had happened. "Stay inside," she told Bram and Cale firmly, both now able to hold their human forms for hours at a time. "Keep Finn with you, and do not open this door for anyone but me." She hurried toward the village center, joining a growing crowd of anxious neighbors gathered near the market square. Grace found her almost immediately, her face pale with worry. "Riders came through the Hendricks farm before dawn," Grace said quickly, her voice low. "They said the family was hiding something, searched every barn and cellar on the property. When they found nothing, they burned the old hay barn as a warning to anyone else who might be lying to them." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Burned it? Over wolves?" "That's what everyone's saying," Grace confirmed, glancing around nervously, before lowering her voice further. "Elena, these aren't ordinary men searching for lost pets. Old Henry swears he saw one of them change, right before his eyes, into something that walked like a man but wasn't a man at all. He's terrified, and honestly, so am I." Elena forced herself to remain calm, despite the panic clawing at her chest. "What else are they saying?" "That whoever is hiding these creatures should turn them over now, before the search grows more desperate," Grace said. "The reward has tripled since yesterday. People are starting to search their own neighbors' properties, hoping to claim it before the riders return." Elena thanked Grace and hurried home immediately, her mind racing through every possible danger now facing her small, secret family. If neighbors began searching properties on their own, hoping for reward money, her carefully guarded secret could unravel at any moment. She needed a plan, and she needed one quickly. She found Bram waiting anxiously by the window when she returned, his sharp eyes immediately catching the fear in her expression. "What happened?" he asked. Elena explained everything Grace had told her, watching as Bram's face grew increasingly tense with each detail. Cale joined them partway through, his own expression darkening with worry, while Finn, still unable to shift into human form, pressed close against Elena's legs, as though sensing the tension in the room. "We need to move deeper into the forest," Bram said finally, once Elena had finished. "Somewhere no one would think to search, somewhere even the riders wouldn't dare follow." "There's an old den my father used to speak of," Elena said slowly, thinking back to childhood memories of her father's hunting stories. "Deep within Blackthorn Forest, past the ridge where the old stone markers stand, He always warned me never to go there alone, said it belonged to something far older than any ordinary wolf pack. Kale's eyes widened slightly at this description. That might be exactly what we need. A place already respected, or feared, enough that no one would dare disturb it. The decision was made quickly after that. Elena gathered what supplies she could carry: blankets, dried food, a small knife, and the few coins she had managed to save. Bram and Kale helped carry the heavier items, while Finn trotted close beside them as they slipped out of the cottage under the cover of early evening shadows, avoiding the main road entirely in favor of narrow game trails only Elena knew well from years of gathering herbs and firewood. The journey deeper into Blackthorn Forest proved more difficult than Elena had anticipated. The trails grew rougher the farther they traveled, thick roots and fallen branches making every step treacherous in the fading light. Bram walked ahead, alert and watchful, occasionally pausing to sniff the air, or listen intently to sounds Elena could not detect at all. Kale remained close beside her, offering a steadying hand whenever the path grew particularly uneven. They reached the ridge her father had once described, just as full darkness settled over the forest, the ancient stone markers rising eerily from the underbrush, like silent sentinels. Beyond them, nestled within a small hollow protected by dense trees, they found the den, larger than Elena had expected, carved deep into a rocky outcropping, and hidden almost entirely from casual view. "This will do," Bram said quietly, examining the entrance with careful attention. "We can defend this position if needed, and it's far enough from the village that even determined searchers might overlook it." They settled in as best they could, arranging blankets against the cold stone floor, sharing a simple meal in tense silence. Finn curled close against Elena's side almost immediately, exhausted from the long journey, while Bram took first watch near the den's entrance, his young face set with a seriousness that made him look far older than his apparent years. Elena could not sleep despite her exhaustion, her mind turning over every possible danger that still awaited them. She watched Kale settle beside his brother near the entrance, both boys speaking in hushed tones she could not quite hear, their expressions grave in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees. "You should rest," Kale said gently, noticing her still awake. "Bram and I will keep watch. You've done enough for one day." "I can't rest," Elena admitted quietly. "Not until I understand more about what we're truly facing. Your father, the Alpha King, what exactly will he do if he finds us here?" Kale exchanged a hesitant glance with Bram before answering carefully. "It depends on what he believes happened. If he thinks we were taken against our will, he might show mercy to whoever is found with us. But if he believes we were hidden deliberately, kept from him out of malice or greed..." He trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought, but Elena understood the implication clearly enough. She had, in fact, hidden 3 royal children from a powerful king for months, regardless of her good intentions. Whether that king would recognize the difference between kindness and kidnapping remained an uncertainty that could determine all of their fates. "Then we need to make sure he understands the truth," Elena said firmly. "That I saved you, cared for you, loved you, rather than took you for any selfish purpose." Bram nodded slowly, though worry remained clear in his dark eyes. "Our father is not known for patience or mercy, especially not since we disappeared. Grief has made him harder than he once was, at least according to what little we remember before that night by the creek." The mention of that night, the mysterious circumstances that had left 3 royal children starving and alone in the forest, reminded Elena of questions that remained unanswered. "Do either of you remember anything more about what happened before I found you? Who chased you, or why?" Both boys shook their heads slowly, frustration evident in their expressions. "Only fragments," Kale admitted. "Fear, running, the cold. Nothing clear enough to be useful." Elena accepted this answer, though she filed the mystery away for later consideration. For now, survival mattered more than understanding every detail of how they had come to be separated from their father's kingdom in the first place. The following days settled into a careful, watchful rhythm within the hidden den. Bram and Kale took turns hunting small game to supplement their dwindling supplies, their wolf forms proving remarkably effective despite their young age. Finn, still unable to shift, remained close to Elena constantly, his loyalty and affection a small comfort amid the constant tension of their hiding. Elena used the quiet moments to continue teaching the boys, using sticks to draw letters in the dirt floor of the den, telling stories to pass the long hours when venturing outside felt too dangerous. Despite everything, small moments of genuine happiness continued to emerge. Laughter shared over a poorly told joke, quiet pride when Kale successfully caught his first rabbit alone, the simple comfort of Finn's warm fur pressed against her side each night. But the peace remained fragile, constantly threatened by distant sounds that might have been searching riders, or simply the ordinary movements of forest creatures. Every unfamiliar noise sent Bram to the den's entrance immediately, his young body tense and ready to defend his family at a moment's notice. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into their hidden refuge, Bram returned from a routine patrol with troubling news. "There are tracks," he said quietly, his expression grim. "Human tracks, following the same ridgeline we used to reach this place. Recent ones." Elena's heart sank immediately. How recent? "A day, perhaps less," Bram answered. "Whoever made them was moving carefully, deliberately, not a hunter simply passing through." Kale's face paled slightly at this news. "They're getting closer." "We may need to move again," Bram said, though exhaustion was evident beneath his careful composure. "Find somewhere even more remote, though I confess I'm not certain how much farther we can travel safely, especially with Finn still unable to shift." Elena looked toward the smallest boy, still curled in his wolf form near the fire, and felt a fresh wave of worry wash over her. Whatever kept Finn from transforming as his brothers had, it left him more vulnerable, less able to defend himself, or travel quickly, if danger arrived suddenly. "We'll figure something out," she said, though uncertainty colored her voice more than she intended. "We always have." That night, as the boys slept fitfully around her, Elena remained awake once more, staring into the darkness beyond the den's entrance, wondering how much longer they could continue running, before the danger finally caught up to them entirely. Somewhere out there, in the vast forest surrounding them, a grieving and powerful king continued his relentless search, drawing closer with every passing day, to the family Elena had built from nothing, and would fight with everything she had to protect, for as long as fate allowed. Alpha King Draven struck the war table so hard that the ancient wood cracked beneath his fist, sending a nearby oil lamp crashing to the stone floor. The flames caught briefly against a scattered map, before one of his advisors rushed forward to smother them, hands shaking with fear rather than urgency over the fire itself. "Nothing," Draven snarled, his voice echoing through the great hall of his northern stronghold. "Weeks of searching, gold spent on every informant across 3 territories, and you bring me nothing." Edmund, his most trusted advisor, and the closest thing Draven had to a friend since his sons vanished, remained carefully still, having learned long ago that sudden movements only provoke the king's grief-fueled temper further. "Our scouts have covered nearly the entire southern range, my king. We believe the trail may lead toward Blackthorn Forest, though the villages there have proven frustratingly unhelpful." "Unhelpful," Draven repeated coldly. "Or hiding something." "Perhaps," Edmund allowed carefully, "though it's equally possible the villagers simply know nothing useful. Ordinary humans rarely notice the difference between an unusual wolf and something more." Draven turned away from his advisor, moving toward the tall window overlooking his kingdom's frozen borders, though spring had begun melting the ice elsewhere. Here, in the heart of his territory, winter seemed to linger stubbornly, mirroring the frozen grief that had settled permanently into the king's chest since the night his 3 sons disappeared. He remembered that night with painful clarity. The betrayal that had shattered his pack from within, a trusted lieutenant revealed as a traitor working for a rival territory, the chaos of battle that followed, and the horrifying discovery afterward that his 3 young sons, barely more than pups, had vanished entirely during the confusion. He had searched every corner of his own stronghold first, refusing to believe they had been taken beyond his borders, before grim reality forced him to expand the search outward. Months had passed since that night, each one adding weight to the growing certainty that his sons might already be dead, lost to cold, hunger, or predators far more dangerous than any political rival. Yet something stubborn within him refused to fully accept that possibility, some instinct that whispered his children still lived, waiting somewhere for him to find them. "Send riders to every village bordering Blackthorn Forest," Draven said finally, his voice quieter now but no less commanding. "Not merely questions this time. Search every barn, every cellar, every hidden corner, where 3 wolf pups might be concealed. My king, Edmund said carefully. Such aggressive searching risks alienating the very villages we need cooperation from. The Hendricks Farm incident has already caused considerable unrest among the local population. I don't care about their unrest, Draven snapped, though a flicker of something like regret crossed his features briefly. I care about finding my sons before it's too late, if it isn't already. Edmund bowed his head slightly, recognizing the futility of further argument. As you command, my king. I'll dispatch additional riders immediately. Alone once more in the great hall, Draven allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability, his powerful shoulders sagging slightly, as exhaustion and grief finally showed through the carefully maintained facade of royal strength. He thought of his sons as he had last seen them, Bram already showing signs of the protective leader he would one day become, Cale's sharp intelligence evident even at his young age, and little Finn, always trailing behind his brothers, always seeking comfort and reassurance from anyone nearby. He wondered, not for the first time, whether his sons still remembered him at all, whether the trauma of that terrible night had erased any memory of the father who had loved them fiercely, despite the pressures and responsibilities of ruling a powerful kingdom. He wondered if they were frightened, alone, perhaps cared for by strangers who had no understanding of what truly slept beneath their roof. The thought of his sons being cared for, even by strangers, brought a strange mixture of relief and jealousy that Draven found difficult to reconcile. Relief that they might be safe, warm, fed. Jealousy that someone else might be providing the comfort and protection that should have been his to give as their father. He returned to his private chambers that evening, the weight of another fruitless day settling heavily upon him. His mate, lost years earlier during a harsh winter illness, had left him solely responsible for raising their 3 sons, a task he had approached with more determination than natural warmth, aware of his own limitations as a single parent to 3 growing pups, with vastly different temperaments and needs. Perhaps, he thought bitterly, staring into the dying embers of his chamber's fireplace, his own inadequacies as a father had somehow contributed to whatever circumstances led his sons into danger that terrible night. Perhaps a better father would have protected them more carefully, anticipated the betrayal that shattered his pack, kept his children close enough that no chaos could have separated them from his protection. Such thoughts served no useful purpose, he knew. Yet grief rarely respected logic or usefulness. He allowed himself only a few more moments of such dark reflection before forcing his mind back toward practical matters, toward the search that continued relentlessly, despite mounting frustration and diminishing hope. The following morning brought news that reignited something Draven had almost feared extinguished entirely within his chest. A scout, recently returned from the villages bordering Blackthorn Forest, requested immediate audience, claiming information too sensitive to share through ordinary channels. Draven received the scout in his private study, dismissing all other attendants despite Edmund's concerned protests. The scout, a lean man named Victor with sharp eyes accustomed to noticing details others might miss, bowed deeply before speaking. My king, I found evidence of unusual pack magic near a small village at the forest's southern edge. Faint, but unmistakable, the kind of residual energy that lingers when young shifters practice control over their transformations. Draven's heart quickened, despite years of practiced royal composure. Where exactly? A small cottage, isolated from the main village, home to a young woman living alone since her father's death. The traces led away from the property recently, deeper into the forest itself, though I lost the trail among thicker terrain. A woman living alone, Draven repeated slowly, turning the information over carefully in his mind. Caring for 3 young shifters would require considerable resources, considerable dedication. What manner of person would take on such a burden? Victor hesitated slightly before answering. The villagers speak well of her, my king. Kind, hard-working, though somewhat private in her habits. Nothing in her reputation suggests malicious intent. Draven considered this information carefully, old suspicion warring against cautious hope. If this woman had indeed found and cared for his missing sons, her motives mattered less to him than the simple fact that his children might finally be within reach after months of desperate searching. Gather a small, discreet party, Draven said finally, decision settling firmly into place. I will lead this search myself. If my sons are truly hiding somewhere within that forest, I intend to find them, and I intend to understand exactly who has been sheltering them, and why." Edmund, summoned back into the study upon hearing the king's decision, immediately voiced concern. "My king, is it wise for you to venture into the field personally? Your safety." "My safety matters little compared to finding my sons," Draven interrupted firmly. "I have trusted others to search on my behalf for months, with nothing to show for their efforts. This time, I search myself." No further argument could dissuade the king from his decision, and preparations began immediately for the journey south toward Blackthorn Forest. Draven found himself unable to sleep that night, his mind consumed with cautious hope and lingering fear in equal measure. What if the trail led nowhere, another false hope destined for bitter disappointment? Worse, what if his sons had suffered some terrible fate that this searching would only confirm rather than resolve? Yet beneath the fear, something stronger persisted, the stubborn hope of a father, unwilling to fully surrender belief in his children's survival. He thought again of the young woman Victor had described, caring for 3 young shifters despite the obvious dangers and challenges such responsibility would present. What kind of person, he wondered, would risk so much for creatures not her own, creatures whose true nature could bring considerable danger to anyone associating with them? Whoever she was, if she had truly protected his sons through whatever circumstances had separated them from him, Draven found himself owing her a debt he could not yet fully comprehend, regardless of how their eventual meeting might unfold. The complexity of these emotions, gratitude mixed with lingering suspicion, hope tangled with fear, remained with him throughout the sleepless night, following him even as dawn finally arrived and preparations for departure reached their conclusion. As his small search party finally set out toward Blackthorn Forest, Draven allowed himself, for the first time in months, to truly believe that his search might soon reach its end, one way or another. Whatever awaited him within that ancient forest, answers, reunion, or perhaps even greater heartbreak, he intended to face it directly, refusing any longer to remain distant from whatever truth had been keeping his sons from him for far too long. The journey south proved slower than Draven's impatience preferred, the small party moving cautiously to avoid drawing unwanted attention from the very villages they needed information from. Draven disguised his royal bearing as best he could, wearing simple traveling clothes, rather than the elaborate garments typically expected of an Alpha King, though nothing could fully disguise the commanding presence and barely restrained intensity that marked him as someone far more significant than an ordinary traveler. Victor led the group with careful precision, retracing the path that had brought him to the edge of the forest weeks earlier. As they drew closer to the region, where he had first detected traces of pack magic, tension within the group increased noticeably, every member aware of the significance this journey held for their grieving king. They arrived at the small village bordering Blackthorn Forest as evening settled over the landscape, golden light filtering through gathering clouds that promised rain before morning. Draven insisted on immediate questioning of local villagers, his patience for further delay, entirely exhausted after months of fruitless searching. The information they gathered proved frustratingly incomplete. Villagers spoke of the young woman Victor had mentioned, confirming her reputation for kindness and hard work, though none could say with certainty where she had gone. Her cottage, they discovered upon investigation, stood empty, abandoned, rather suddenly, if the half-finished chores and untended garden were any indication. "She's fled," Draven said grimly, standing within the small, empty cottage that had apparently sheltered his sons for months. Evidence of their presence remained scattered throughout the space, small claw marks on wooden furniture, remnants of food far exceeding what a single woman would require, blankets arranged in patterns suggesting multiple occupants sharing warmth against the cold. "Perhaps she learned of our search," Edmund suggested carefully, having insisted on accompanying his king despite Draven's initial reluctance. "Fear alone might explain such sudden departure, regardless of her true intentions toward your sons." Draven said nothing immediately, his sharp eyes continuing to catalog every detail within the small cottage, searching for any clue that might reveal where this mysterious woman had taken his children. His gaze settled eventually, on a small, carved wooden toy, resting forgotten in the corner, crude, but clearly made with considerable care and affection, exactly the kind of gift a loving guardian might create for children under her protection. Something shifted within Draven's chest as he studied that small toy, grief and hope tangling together with a new emotion he could not immediately name. Whoever this woman was, whatever her reasons for fleeing now, the evidence within this cottage suggested genuine care, rather than malicious intent toward his missing sons. "Find her trail," he commanded finally, turning toward his small search party with renewed determination. "Wherever she has taken them, however far into this forest she has gone, we will find them. I refuse to come this close, only to lose them again." The search resumed with fresh urgency, as darkness fully claimed the landscape outside, Draven's small party fanning out carefully to search for any sign of the path Elena and his sons had taken deeper into the ancient, watchful forest that had somehow become the final barrier between a grieving father and the reunion he desperately sought. Rain hammered against the rocky outcropping sheltering their den, and Elena pulled Finn closer against her side as thunder rolled across the darkened sky. The small wolf trembled at each crash, pressing his face into her shoulder, and she stroked his damp fur gently, murmuring quiet reassurances, even as her own nerves remained on edge from days of constant vigilance. Bram and Cale sat near the entrance, watching the storm with expressions that suggested more than simple weather concerned them. "Storms make tracking difficult," Bram said quietly. "For us, and for anyone searching for us. That could work in our favor," Cale pointed out. "Any pursuers would struggle to follow our trail through this rain. Or it could mean they're forced to search more aggressively, closer to where they last found evidence of us," Bram countered, his young face creased with worry beyond his years. Elena listened to their exchange with growing unease, though she said nothing immediately, focusing instead on comforting Finn as the storm continued its relentless assault against their hidden shelter. She had grown to appreciate these quiet moments between the boys, watching them think and reason together with a maturity that continued to surprise her, despite months of witnessing it firsthand. As the storm gradually eased into a gentler rain, Finn's trembling finally subsided, and Elena felt him relax slightly against her side. She continued stroking his fur absently, her mind wandering toward memories of the past months, the fear and uncertainty that had marked their journey since fleeing her cottage, but also the small, precious moments of joy that had emerged, despite everything. She remembered teaching Bram to read his first full sentence, his fierce concentration giving way to a rare, unguarded smile of accomplishment. She remembered Cale's careful, methodical approach to everything he attempted, whether learning new words or perfecting his hunting technique, always determined to master skills completely, rather than settling for adequate understanding. And she remembered countless quiet evenings with Finn curled against her, offering uncomplicated affection that asked for nothing beyond simple companionship. These children, wolves, princes, whatever term truly fit their complicated nature, had become the center of her entire existence, filling a void she had not fully recognized until they arrived. She could not imagine returning to the solitary life she had lived before finding them beside that frozen creek, regardless of how much danger their presence had brought into her world. "You're thinking hard about something," Cale observed, settling beside her now that the worst of the storm had passed. "Your face does this thing when you're deep in thought." Elena smiled despite herself. "I was just remembering everything that's happened since I found you three. It feels like a lifetime ago, though it's only been a few months." "Do you regret it?" Bram asked quietly, joining them near the fire. "Finding us, I mean. Everything that's happened since." Elena considered the question seriously before answering, understanding its importance to both boys. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Whatever danger we face now, whatever uncertainty lies ahead, I would make the same choice again without hesitation." Something eased visibly in both boys' expressions at her answer, tension they had clearly been carrying finally releasing slightly. Bram reached out hesitantly, placing his hand over hers where it still rested against Finn's fur. "Thank you," he said simply, though the weight behind those two words carried far more meaning than their brevity suggested. They spent the remainder of that evening sharing quiet stories, Cale describing fragmented memories that occasionally surfaced from before the night they were separated from their father. Small details about a stern but loving figure who sometimes allowed rare moments of playfulness, despite the serious demands of ruling a powerful kingdom. Bram added memories of his own, training exercises meant to prepare him for future leadership responsibilities, quiet lessons about honor and protection that had clearly shaped his protective instincts even now. Elena listened carefully to every detail, Understanding that these fragmented memories represented pieces of a larger identity, the boys were slowly reclaiming, as trust and safety allowed such memories to surface. She wondered, not without some anxiety, what their father might truly be like, whether the powerful, potentially dangerous king everyone feared might also possess the capacity for genuine love and warmth these small memories suggested. As the evening deepened into full night, Finn finally stirred against Elena's side, lifting his head with an expression that immediately caught everyone's attention. Something had changed in his posture, a tension different from his usual anxious alertness during storms. "Finn?" Elena asked carefully, watching as the smallest boy's body began trembling with an intensity she recognized from Bram and Cale's own transformations weeks earlier. "It's happening," Bram said quietly, moving closer with careful attention. Finally, Elena held perfectly still, murmuring soft encouragement as Finn's small wolf body began shifting before her eyes, fur receding, limbs lengthening and reshaping into distinctly human proportions. The transformation took longer than his brothers had, Finn's small frame trembling with visible effort throughout the process, but eventually, a small boy lay curled against Elena's side, where the wolf pup had rested moments before. He looked younger than his brothers, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with the same wheat-colored hair matching his previous fur, and wide, tearful eyes that immediately sought Elena's reassuring presence. "Elena," he whispered, his first human word, carrying unmistakable relief and affection. "I'm here," she said immediately, gathering him close, despite his trembling. "I'm right here, sweet boy." Bram and Cale crowded close as well, both clearly relieved to finally see their youngest brother in human form, after months of uncertainty about when, or if, this transformation might occur. "You did it," Cale said softly, reaching out to squeeze Finn's small shoulder gently. Finn managed a weak, exhausted smile, despite his obvious fatigue. "It was scary," he admitted quietly. "But I could feel you all here with me. That helped." They settled him carefully near the fire, wrapping him in the warmest blankets available, watching over him protectively, as exhaustion quickly claimed him into deep sleep. Elena remained beside him long after Bram and Cale had drifted off themselves, studying his peaceful, finally human features, with an overwhelming rush of protective love that left her slightly breathless. All 3 boys now capable of moving between their wolf and human forms, their family felt somehow more complete, more real, despite the continued danger surrounding them. Elena found herself smiling softly into the darkness, grateful for this small victory amid so much uncertainty, even as she remained aware that their most difficult challenges likely still awaited them somewhere in the days ahead. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having cleared entirely overnight to reveal a sky washed clean and bright with early sunlight. Elena woke to find all 3 boys already stirring, Finn testing his new human limbs with careful, curious movements, while his brothers watched with evident amusement and affection. "You'll get used to it," Bram assured him, helping steady Finn as he attempted his first uncertain steps on human legs. "It felt strange for me too at first." Elena watched the scene with quiet joy, grateful for this peaceful morning despite everything still threatening their safety. She prepared what simple breakfast remained from their dwindling supplies, watching the boys share easy laughter as Finn stumbled through his first attempts at human coordination. Their peace, however brief, would not last uninterrupted. As they finished their small meal, Bram suddenly went rigid, his sharp ears catching some distant sound the others had not yet noticed. "Someone's coming," he said quietly, all playfulness immediately vanishing from his expression. Elena's heart lurched with familiar fear as she quickly gathered their few scattered belongings. "How close?" "Close enough that we need to move now," Bram answered grimly, already helping Finn toward the den's rear exit, a narrow passage Elena had discovered during their exploration of the hidden shelter. Cale moved to Elena's side, his young face set with determined protectiveness despite obvious fear. "Whatever happens, we stay together, all of us." Elena nodded firmly, gathering Finn's small hand into her own, as they prepared to flee once more, into the uncertain protection of the surrounding forest. Whatever pursuers had finally located their hidden refuge, she resolved silently, they would face this new danger together, exactly as they had faced every challenge since that fateful night beside the frozen creek months earlier. Branches whipped against Elena's arms as she ran, Finn's small hand gripped tightly in hers, his shorter legs struggling to match the desperate pace she forced upon them both. Behind her, she could hear Bram and Kale moving quickly through the underbrush, both still holding human form despite the obvious advantage their wolf shapes would offer for speed. "We need to split up," Bram called quietly, catching up to walk alongside her despite the danger. If they're tracking scent, dividing might confuse pursuit long enough to escape. "No," Elena said firmly, refusing even to consider the suggestion. "We stay together. I won't risk losing any of you now." Kale appeared on her other side, breathing hard from the pace but otherwise steady. "There's a ravine ahead, steep enough that horses couldn't follow easily. If we can reach it before they catch up, we might gain enough distance to find better shelter." They pushed forward with renewed urgency, Elena's lungs burning from exertion, Finn's small frame beginning to flag despite his determined effort to keep pace with his older brothers. She scooped him into her arms without slowing, ignoring the protest of her already exhausted muscles, refusing to let anything slow their desperate flight. The sound of pursuit grew steadily louder behind them, hoofbeats mixed with what sounded like multiple voices calling instructions to each other. Elena's heart pounded with fear as she recognized the organized, purposeful nature of the approaching search, nothing like the casual questioning riders they had previously evaded. They reached the ravine Kale had mentioned just as their pursuers finally came into view behind them, a small group of riders, led by a figure whose commanding presence was unmistakable, even at a distance. Elena's breath caught as she recognized, with sudden and absolute certainty, exactly who was leading this final pursuit. "It's him," Bram said quietly, his voice carrying a complicated mixture of fear and something that sounded almost like desperate hope. "It's our father." Elena's mind raced through their limited options as the riders drew inexorably closer, the steep ravine offering only a narrow, treacherous path downward that would slow them considerably, even as it might slow their pursuers equally. "We need to decide now," she said urgently. "Down into the ravine, or continue running, and hope to lose them in denser forest ahead." "The ravine," Kale decided quickly. "If we can reach the bottom and follow the stream south, we might find caves. I remember exploring as a much younger pup, before everything happened. Places even our father might not immediately think to search." They began the difficult descent immediately, loose rocks shifting treacherously beneath their feet as they scrambled down the steep incline. Elena kept Finn close against her, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck as she navigated the dangerous terrain, while Bram and Kale moved ahead, testing the safest path forward. Above them, the riders had reached the ravine's edge, and Elena heard a voice ring out with commanding authority that sent chills through her entire body. "Stop where you are. I mean you no harm, but I will not allow you to endanger my sons further by continuing this reckless flight." Elena froze despite herself, some deep instinct responding to the raw command in that voice. Bram and Kale had stopped as well, both staring upward toward the ravine's edge where their father now stood, his powerful frame silhouetted against the bright morning sky. "Bram, Kale." Draven's voice cracked slightly on his son's names, revealing emotion beneath the commanding authority. "Please. I've searched for you for months, feared the worst more times than I can count. I only want to know you're safe." Elena watched the boys' faces carefully, seeing the conflict evident in their expressions, fear warring with something that looked remarkably like longing. Whatever fragmented memories they retained of their father, whatever fear the circumstances of their separation had instilled, some deeper bond clearly remained, calling them toward the powerful figure watching from above. "What about Elena?" Bram called back finally, his voice carrying clearly across the ravine despite its tremor. "She saved us, protected us. If we come to you, you must promise she won't be harmed." Draven's expression, even at this distance, shifted noticeably at this demand, surprise evident in his posture. "The woman who has been caring for you? She found us starving, dying, in the snow," Kale added, his own voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "She's kept us safe ever since, at considerable risk to herself. Whatever you believe about why we disappeared, she is not our enemy." A long moment of silence stretched between them, Draven studying the small group gathered at the bottom of the ravine, with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle with awareness. Finally he spoke again, his voice softer than before, though no less commanding. "I give you my word as Alpha King," he said clearly, "that no harm will come to the woman who has protected my sons. Please, come up from there. Let us end this pursuit and speak properly, as a family should. Elena looked toward Bram and Cale, seeing the decision already forming in their expressions, despite lingering caution. Finn, still held securely in her arms, lifted his head to study the distant figure of his father, with wide, curious eyes, rather than fear. "What do we do?" she asked quietly, trusting the boys' judgment about their own father more than her own limited understanding of the situation. "We trust him," Bram said finally, though uncertainty remained clear in his voice. "Whatever else has happened, he's still our father, and he gave his word about your safety." They began the climb back up from the ravine together, considerably more cautious than their frantic descent had been. Elena kept Finn close against her side, her heart pounding with a complicated mixture of fear and cautious hope as they approached the waiting figure of the Alpha King. Draven dismounted as they drew closer, his powerful frame somehow both intimidating and, upon closer observation, marked by evident exhaustion and worry that suggested months of genuine suffering over his missing sons. His sharp eyes moved immediately to Bram and Cale, studying them with desperate intensity, before finally settling on Finn, still held protectively in Elena's arms. "You've grown so much," Draven said quietly, his commanding voice softening into something almost fragile with emotion. "All three of you. I feared I would never see this day." Bram stepped forward first, his young face carefully composed, despite obvious internal conflict. "Father," he said simply, the single word carrying enormous weight after months of separation and uncertainty. Draven closed the remaining distance quickly, pulling both Bram and Cale into a fierce embrace that spoke more clearly than any words could of the genuine grief and love he had carried throughout their separation. Elena watched, still holding Finn close, uncertain of her own place within this emotional reunion. After a long moment, Draven released his older sons and turned his attention finally toward Elena and the smallest boy still held in her arms. His expression, as he studied them both, carried complicated layers of gratitude, curiosity, and something else Elena could not immediately identify. "You must be the woman who saved my sons," he said, his voice carrying quiet, sincere gratitude despite its inherent authority. "I owe you a debt I'm not certain I can properly repay." Elena found herself uncertain how to respond to such direct acknowledgement from someone whose reputation had caused her considerable fear throughout the past months. "I only did what anyone with a heart would have done," she managed finally. "They needed help. I couldn't turn away from that." Draven's sharp eyes studied her carefully, an expression crossing his face that suggested he was reconsidering everything he had previously believed about the situation. "Many would have turned away regardless," he said quietly. The danger of harboring shifter children, particularly royal ones being actively searched for, would have discouraged most from such involvement. "They were starving," Elena said simply, as though this explanation alone justified every risk she had taken. "I couldn't have lived with myself if I had simply walked away." Something shifted further in Draven's expression at these words, respect and curiosity mixing with the gratitude already evident in his features. Before he could respond further, Finn suddenly stirred in Elena's arms, lifting his head to study his father directly, for the first time since their reunion began. "Are you really our father?" he asked, his young voice carrying innocent curiosity rather than fear. Draven's composed expression cracked slightly at this simple question, emotion breaking through his carefully maintained royal bearing. He knelt down to Finn's level, his powerful frame suddenly seeming less intimidating and more simply that of a father, desperate to reconnect with his youngest son. "Yes," he said softly, "I am your father, and I have missed you more than words could ever properly express." Finn studied him seriously for a long moment, before finally reaching out one small hand toward his father, a gesture of tentative trust that seemed to affect Draven more deeply than any words could have. He took his son's small hand gently, his composed expression finally giving way to visible tears he made no attempt to hide. Elena watched this tender reunion with her own eyes filling with unexpected emotion, understanding that whatever complicated challenges still awaited them, this moment represented something genuinely important, a family finally beginning to heal from months of painful separation and uncertainty. The journey back toward the northern stronghold took 3 full days, and Elena found herself constantly aware of Draven's presence beside her, his tall figure a steady, commanding constant, as their small party made careful progress through the forest. Bram and Kale rode close together, sharing quiet conversation with their father whenever the terrain allowed, slowly rebuilding a connection that months of separation had strained, but clearly not broken entirely. Finn remained mostly with Elena, still somewhat shy around his father despite their tender reunion, though she noticed him watching Draven with increasing curiosity as the journey progressed. She encouraged this growing comfort gently, understanding that whatever bond needed rebuilding between father and youngest son would require patience rather than force. "You're quiet," Draven observed one evening, settling near their small campfire while the boys prepared for sleep nearby. "Is something troubling you?" Elena considered her answer carefully before speaking. "I'm simply uncertain what awaits us at your stronghold. I've heard troubling rumors about how thoroughly, and sometimes harshly, your search for your sons was conducted. I worry how your court might view someone who kept them hidden for so long, regardless of my intentions." Draven's expression grew thoughtful, his sharp eyes reflecting the firelight as he considered her concerns seriously, rather than dismissing it. "My court will follow my lead in this matter," he said finally. "And I have already made clear that you saved my sons rather than endangered them. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer directly to me." "That's kind," Elena said, though uncertainty remained clear in her voice. "But courts have their own opinions, regardless of what their king declares publicly." Draven studied her for a long moment, something in his expression shifting into careful consideration. "You speak as though you have experience with such political complexities, despite your simple life as a woodcutter's daughter." Elena managed a small, tired smile. "I've simply lived long enough to understand that people rarely accept things as simply as their leaders might wish." A quiet laugh escaped Draven, surprising them both with its genuine warmth. "A fair observation," he admitted. "Though I promise you this, whatever complications my court might present, you will not face them without my full support and protection." Elena felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at these words, gratitude mixing with an emotion she was not yet prepared to fully examine. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you might realize." Their conversation was interrupted by Finn's small voice, calling softly from where he lay nestled in his blankets. "Elena, will you tell us a story before we sleep?" She smiled and moved toward the boys immediately, grateful for the distraction from complicated emotions she was not yet ready to name. Draven watched this interaction with quiet interest, noticing the easy affection between Elena and his sons, the natural way she settled among them despite their royal status and her own humble origins. As Elena began a familiar story, one she had told countless times during their months together in hiding, Draven found himself listening with unexpected attention, appreciating the gentle warmth in her voice, the way all three of his sons relaxed visibly under her calming presence. Whatever complicated political challenges awaited them at his stronghold, he resolved silently, he would ensure this remarkable woman received the gratitude and protection she deserved for everything she had sacrificed on his son's behalf. They arrived at Draven's northern stronghold on the afternoon of the third day, the massive structure rising impressively against the mountainous backdrop, its stone walls both beautiful and clearly formidable. Elena felt considerable anxiety as they approached, aware of numerous eyes watching their arrival from the walls and courtyards, curious and undoubtedly judgmental about the mysterious woman accompanying their returned princes. Edmund greeted them first, his relief at seeing the three young princes safely returned evident despite his careful, formal composure. "My king, this is wonderful news, beyond anything we dared hope for, and this must be the woman responsible for their safe return?" "Elena," Draven confirmed, gesturing toward her with an unexpected formality that made her slightly uncomfortable. "She has cared for my sons through considerable hardship and danger. I expect her to be treated with the respect and gratitude such sacrifice deserves." Edmund bowed toward Elena with evident sincerity. "Then you have the gratitude of this entire kingdom, my lady. We feared the worst for many months." Elena accepted this greeting with as much grace as she could manage, though the formal titles and clear political weight of their situation left her feeling increasingly out of place amid such grandeur. She caught Bram watching her with sympathetic understanding, clearly recognizing her discomfort despite her attempts to hide it. "It will take time," he said quietly, moving close enough that only she could hear. "But you belong here now, Elena. Whatever the court might think initially, that will not remain true for long." She appreciated his reassurance, though the following days proved his prediction somewhat optimistic. Several members of Draven's court regarded Elena with obvious suspicion, whispering among themselves about her true motives, questioning why a simple human woman should receive such prominent gratitude for what some considered merely fortunate circumstance rather than genuine heroism. Elena bore this scrutiny as gracefully as possible, focusing her attention primarily on the boys' continued adjustment to their new circumstances, rather than allowing court politics to consume her thoughts. She noticed Draven, too, seemed increasingly protective of her position within his stronghold, quick to correct anyone whose comments toward her bordered on disrespect. One particular evening, several days after their arrival, tension finally came to a head during a formal gathering meant to celebrate the prince's safe return. A senior court member, a stern woman named Rosalind, who commanded considerable influence among Draven's advisors, approached Elena directly, her expression carrying clear skepticism. "It seems remarkable," Rosalind said, her tone carrying subtle accusation beneath polite words, "that a simple human woman managed to keep 3 royal shifters hidden successfully for months, evading our most experienced trackers entirely. One might almost suspect deliberate assistance from within our own ranks." Elena felt her stomach tighten at this implication, understanding immediately that Rosalind was suggesting she had somehow been complicit with whoever had originally caused the prince's disappearance. Before she could formulate an appropriate response, Draven's voice cut through the tension with unmistakable authority. "Are you suggesting my sons are mistaken about who saved their lives?" he asked, his tone carrying dangerous edges that immediately silenced surrounding conversation. "Or perhaps you doubt their own account of finding themselves starving and abandoned before Elena's intervention." Rosalind paled slightly under her king's direct scrutiny, quickly backtracking from her implied accusation. "Of course not, my king. I simply meant to observe the remarkable nature of her success in evading capture." "Remarkable, perhaps," Draven agreed, though his tone remained sharp, but not suspicious. "Elena's dedication to my son's safety should be celebrated, not questioned through implications you clearly cannot support with actual evidence." The conversation ended there, Rosalind offering a stiff apology before retreating from further confrontation. But Elena remained shaken by the exchange long after the gathering concluded. Draven found her later that evening, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the moonlit courtyard, her expression troubled despite her attempts to appear composed. "I apologize for Rosalind's behavior," he said quietly, joining her at the balcony's edge. "She means well, generally, though her caution sometimes manifests as unwarranted suspicion." "She's not entirely wrong to wonder," Elena admitted softly. "It does seem remarkable that I managed to hide them so successfully, especially against such determined searching." Draven studied her carefully in the moonlight, something thoughtful crossing his sharp features. "Perhaps it simply speaks to your remarkable dedication and resourcefulness, rather than anything more suspicious." Elena managed a small, grateful smile at his continued support, though uncertainty about her place within this complicated new world remained clear in her expression. "I appreciate your defense," she said quietly, "but I understand this transition will not be simple, for anyone involved." "No," Draven agreed, his voice softening further. "It will not be simple, but I find myself increasingly grateful for the complications you've brought into my life, Elena, despite whatever challenges remain ahead." Something in his tone, gentle and sincere, in a way that felt different from his usual commanding presence, made Elena's heart flutter unexpectedly. She glanced toward him, finding his sharp eyes studying her, with an intensity that suggested emotions neither of them had yet fully acknowledged. Before either could address this growing awareness between them, a commotion from within the stronghold interrupted the quiet moment, urgent voices calling for the king's immediate attention. Draven's expression shifted instantly back into commanding authority, as he moved quickly toward the source of disturbance, Elena following closely behind, her earlier emotional distraction replaced immediately by concern over whatever new crisis had emerged. They found Edmund waiting anxiously near the main hall, his expression grave. "My king, we've received troubling information. It seems the traitor responsible for your son's original disappearance has been located, hiding within a neighboring territory. More concerning still, reports suggest this individual may have learned of the prince's return, and could be planning further action against them." Draven's expression darkened immediately, protective fury replacing his earlier gentler demeanor entirely. Where exactly has this traitor been located? Within the borders of Lord Nathaniel's territory, approximately 2 days' ride from here, Edmund answered. Our informant suggests immediate action may be necessary to prevent further danger to your sons. Elena felt fresh fear grip her chest at this news, understanding immediately that whatever peace they had briefly found upon reaching Draven's stronghold now faced serious new threat. She glanced toward Draven, seeing her own concern reflected clearly in his darkened expression as he began issuing rapid commands to address this unexpected and dangerous development. The great hall fell into tense silence as Draven paced before his assembled advisors, his powerful frame radiating barely contained fury at the news Edmund had delivered. The Dana stood quietly near the boys, her arms wrapped protectively around Finn, while Bram and Kale pressed close on either side, all three clearly frightened by the sudden re-emergence of danger they had believed finally behind them. Tell me everything you know about this traitor, Draven demanded, turning sharply toward Edmund. Name, appearance, motive, everything. His name is Marcus, Edmund replied carefully, formerly one of your most trusted lieutenants before his betrayal. Our informant suggests he acted on behalf of Lord Nathaniel, hoping to weaken your pack's influence by eliminating your heirs entirely, creating chaos he believed would benefit his own territorial ambitions. And now that he's learned my sons survived and returned safely, Draven pressed, his voice carrying dangerous edges. He may attempt to finish what he started months ago, Edmund admitted grimly, or flee entirely, understanding his original plan has failed completely. Draven's jaw tightened visibly at this assessment, his sharp eyes moving toward his 3 sons, and Elena, with an expression that mixed protective determination with lingering fear over the danger still threatening his family. We cannot simply wait to discover which path he chooses, he said finally. I intend to lead a party myself, to Lord Nathaniel's territory, to confront this traitor directly and ensure he can never threaten my sons again. My king, Edmund cautioned, such direct action risks significant political consequences. Lord Nathaniel may claim ignorance of Marcus's activities, and direct confrontation within his territory could be viewed as unprovoked aggression. I care little for political consequences when my son's safety remains threatened, Draven replied firmly. I will address whatever diplomatic complications arise afterward. For now, my priority remains ensuring Marcus can never again endanger my family. Elena listened to this exchange with growing concern, understanding the danger Draven intended to face directly on his son's behalf. She caught his eye briefly across the hall, seeing determination, mixed with something that looked almost like reassurance, meant specifically for her. I need to speak with you privately, she said quietly, once the immediate planning had concluded, and advisors began dispersing to prepare for the coming confrontation. Draven nodded, leading her toward a quieter chamber where they could speak without interruption. Once alone, Elena voiced the concern that had been building since Edmund's initial announcement. Please be careful, she said, her voice carrying more emotion than she had intended to reveal. The boys have already lost so much. They cannot lose you as well. Something softened in Draven's expression at her words, genuine warmth replacing his earlier fierce determination momentarily. I have no intention of leaving my sons fatherless, he said quietly, or leaving you to face this world without my protection, Elena. The unspoken implication behind his words, the growing bond neither of them had yet fully addressed, hung heavily in the air between them. Elena felt her breath catch slightly as Draven stepped closer, his sharp eyes studying her with an intensity that made her heart race, despite the serious circumstances surrounding them. When this is finished, he said softly, when Marcus can no longer threaten my family, I would like to discuss something important with you. Something beyond simple gratitude for your protection of my sons. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, understanding clearly the deeper meaning behind his careful phrasing. I would like that, she said quietly, meaning it more sincerely than she had expected. Draven reached out, gently taking her hand in his much larger one, a simple gesture that nonetheless carried significant weight given their circumstances. Then I will return to you, he said firmly, and to my sons, and we will discuss whatever future might exist between us. He departed the following morning, leading a carefully selected group of trusted warriors toward Lord Nathaniel's territory, leaving Elena behind with the boys and strict instructions, ensuring their continued safety within the heavily guarded stronghold. The following 2 days passed with agonizing slowness, Elena struggling to maintain calm composure, for the sake of the boys despite her own considerable worry over Draven's safety. Bram, in particular, seemed to sense her anxiety, his own concern for his father evident, despite his attempts to appear strong for his younger brothers. "He'll be all right," he said one evening, more to reassure himself than Elena. "Our father is powerful, experienced. Marcus won't be able to defeat him." "I believe that too," Elena agreed, though uncertainty remained clear beneath her attempted confidence. "But that doesn't make waiting any easier." Cale, ever practical despite his young age, occupied himself by helping Elena with various small tasks around the stronghold, clearly needing distraction from his own worry. Finn remained closest to Elena throughout the tense waiting period, his small hand frequently seeking hers, as though physical connection might somehow protect against the uncertainty surrounding them. News finally arrived on the evening of the second day, a messenger arriving breathless and urgent, requesting immediate audience with Elena and the princes. Her heart pounded with fear as she hurried to receive whatever news awaited, uncertain whether to expect celebration or devastating loss. The messenger's expression, upon delivering his news, revealed relief rather than tragedy. "The king has succeeded," he announced. "Marcus has been captured and will face justice for his betrayal. Lord Nathaniel has denied any knowledge of the plot, though the king remains skeptical of this claim. Regardless, the immediate danger has been eliminated." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that her legs nearly buckled beneath her, and she gathered all 3 boys into a fierce embrace, tears of relief streaming freely down her face. "He's safe," she whispered repeatedly, as much for her own reassurance as theirs. "Your father is safe." Draven returned 2 days later, his powerful frame showing signs of the confrontation he had faced, minor injuries visible despite his otherwise triumphant bearing. Elena rushed to meet him as his party entered the stronghold's courtyard, her relief at seeing him safely returned overwhelming any hesitation about displaying such obvious emotion publicly. "You're safe," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she reached him. Draven's expression softened immediately upon seeing her, exhaustion giving way to genuine warmth. "I promised I would return," he said quietly, reaching out to gently touch her face. "I intend to keep every promise I make to you, Elena." The boys reached them moments later, their own relief evident, as they embraced their father, despite his obvious exhaustion from the journey and confrontation. Draven accepted their affection gratefully, his earlier fierce determination finally giving way to simple, profound relief at having successfully protected his family from the final threat that had haunted them since their original separation months earlier. That evening, once the boys had finally settled into peaceful sleep, exhausted by the emotional intensity of recent days, Draven found Elena once more on the same balcony, where their earlier conversation had been interrupted by urgent news of Marcus's location. The moonlight illuminated her features gently as she turned to acknowledge his approach, warmth evident in her expression, despite the exhaustion of recent tension. "You mentioned something you wished to discuss," she said softly, once the danger had passed. Draven moved closer, his sharp eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. "I did," he confirmed quietly. "Elena, these past months have shown me something I never expected to find again after losing my mate years ago. You saved my sons through remarkable courage and sacrifice, but you've also brought warmth and light back into my life that I believed lost forever." Elena felt her heart race at these words, understanding clearly the direction of his careful declaration. "Draven," she began softly, uncertain how to properly respond to such profound sentiment. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he continued gently, "only that you consider remaining here, not simply as the woman who saved my sons, but as someone I hope might eventually consider building a future alongside myself and my children permanently." The weight of his words settled meaningfully between them, the culmination of months of danger, sacrifice, and slowly growing connection, finally finding voice in this quiet, moonlit moment. Elena studied his sincere expression carefully, understanding that whatever answer she gave would shape not only her own future, but the future of the 3 remarkable boys who had already become as precious to her as any children born from her own body. Elena's answer came not immediately in words, but in the way she reached for Draven's hand, holding it firmly as she gathered her thoughts beneath the quiet moonlight. When she finally spoke, Her voice carried certainty that surprised even herself. "From the moment I found those 3 pups by the creek," she said softly, "my life changed completely. I never expected to become part of anything so significant, so complicated, or so wonderful. I love your sons as though they were my own, Draven. And I find myself caring for you as well, more deeply than I anticipated when we first met." Draven's expression lit with genuine happiness, a rare and beautiful sight given the seriousness that typically marked his features. "Then you'll consider staying," he said, hope evident in his voice. "Building something permanent between us, alongside raising Bram, Kale, and Finn together." "I would like that very much," Elena confirmed, smiling warmly, despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Their conversation was interrupted moments later by soft footsteps approaching the balcony. 3 familiar shapes emerging from the shadows, with expressions suggesting they had been listening more closely than perhaps appropriate. Bram, Kale, and Finn stood together, their young faces bright with hopeful anticipation. "Does this mean you're staying with us forever?" Finn asked, his innocent question cutting straight through any remaining formality between the adults. Elena laughed softly, extending her arms to gather all 3 boys close, despite their eavesdropping. "Yes, sweet boy," she confirmed. "I'm staying with all of you forever, if you'll have me." Bram's usually serious expression broke into genuine, unguarded joy. "We've always wanted you to stay," he admitted, "since almost the very beginning." Kale nodded his agreement, his practical nature giving way momentarily to pure happiness. "You're already our family, Elena. This just makes it official." Draven watched this tender scene with visible emotion, his powerful presence softened entirely by the obvious love surrounding him. He moved closer, wrapping his arms around Elena and his 3 sons together, creating a family unit that felt both surprising and completely natural, given everything they had endured together. "We should celebrate properly," Draven said finally, his voice thick with happiness. "A formal announcement, perhaps a celebration the entire kingdom can share in, marking not only my son's safe return, but also the beginning of our new family." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation and adjustment, as Elena settled more permanently into her new life within Draven's stronghold. The initial suspicions some court members had shown gradually faded as they witnessed firsthand the genuine love and dedication Elena showed toward the princes, along with the obvious happiness her presence brought to their previously grieving king. Rosalind, in particular, softened considerably after witnessing Elena's patient handling of a minor crisis involving Finn's continued adjustment to court life, her earlier skepticism giving way to grudging, then genuine, respect. "I misjudged you initially," she admitted to Elena one afternoon. "Your dedication to these boys extends far beyond simple duty or reward. I apologize for my earlier suspicions." Elena accepted this apology graciously, understanding that trust, particularly within complicated political environments, required time and consistent demonstration rather than simple declaration. She focused her energy primarily on helping the boys adjust to their restored royal life, balancing their newfound comfort and safety against the important lessons of resilience and compassion she had taught them during their months of hiding together. Bram grew increasingly confident in his role as eldest prince, his natural protective instincts finding proper outlet in formal training alongside his father's most trusted warriors, while never losing the gentle warmth Elena had helped nurture during their difficult months together. Kale's sharp intelligence found welcome challenge in scholarly pursuits, his curiosity about the world expanding well beyond what limited resources their hidden den could have ever offered him. Finn, still the most affectionate and sensitive of the 3 brothers, continued growing more confident daily, his initial shyness around his father giving way to genuine, joyful connection. Draven, too, found himself transformed by these developments, his previously guarded, grief-hardened demeanor softening considerably under the combined influence of his returned sons and Elena's steady, warm presence within his life. Advisors who had known him for years commented privately on the remarkable change, noting a lightness in their king's bearing that had been entirely absent since the loss of his original mate years earlier. Their formal celebration, when it finally arrived, brought together representatives from throughout Draven's kingdom, all eager to witness the joyful reunion of their missing princes, alongside the remarkable woman responsible for their safe return. Elena stood proudly beside Draven as he addressed the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clear, sincere gratitude, as he formally acknowledged her role in his family's healing. "Many months ago," he announced, "I believed I had lost everything precious to me. Today, thanks to the courage and love of one remarkable woman, I stand before you with my sons safely returned, and with the promise of continued happiness I never expected to find again." The crowd's enthusiastic response confirmed what Elena had gradually come to understand throughout recent weeks, that her place within this new family and kingdom had been genuinely, warmly accepted, despite the unusual circumstances that had brought her into their lives. She caught Bram's proud smile, Cale's satisfied nod, and Finn's delighted wave from where the boys stood nearby, feeling overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected journey that had led her to this moment. As the celebration continued into the evening, Draven found a quiet moment to pull Elena aside, his expression carrying the same warmth that had characterized their growing relationship throughout recent weeks. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you've given my family. For the courage you showed that first night by the creek, and every day since. Thank you for trusting me with something so precious," Elena replied softly, "and for welcoming me into your family so completely." They stood together comfortably, watching the boys laugh and play nearby with other children from the kingdom, finally able to enjoy a normal, happy childhood, free from the danger and uncertainty that had marked their early years. Elena felt profound peace settle over her, understanding that whatever challenges might still arise in their future, they would face them together, as the genuine, loving family they had all worked so hard to build. Years later, Elena would often think back to that frozen night beside the creek, marveling at how a single moment of compassion had transformed her entire existence so completely. What began as simple kindness toward 3 starving abandoned pups had grown into a love story, spanning danger, sacrifice, and ultimately profound joy, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most precious and lasting happiness imaginable. The kingdom continued flourishing under Draven's renewed strength and purpose, his sons growing into remarkable young men who carried forward the lessons of compassion, courage, and unconditional love that Elena had instilled in them during their most vulnerable days together. And through it all, Elena remained exactly what she had always been from that very first night, a woman whose simple, powerful choice to save 3 helpless creatures had ultimately saved herself as well, granting her a family, a purpose, and a love story more beautiful than anything she could have ever imagined for a simple woodcutter's daughter living quietly at the edge of an ancient, mysterious forest.